You're listening to Hard Talk Grenada via www.hardtalkgrenada.com.
My enemy's walls are bound to crumble, and to the floor their spears will fall. I've been made and sealed with love, but time to battle, I'll find them all. I felt the whips and remember chains, but my sword has been forged by my father's flames. Fight your fears and heal your pain, and victory will be in your name.
I used to be weak, but I'm not weak no more. I found the strength of my ancestors deep down in my African core. I used to be frightened, I'm not afraid no more. The Father blessed me with the heart of a lion and a warrior soul. So no weapon that form against I shall not prevail. And no man that rise against I, that war they shall never win. 'Cause I will conquer, oh I will conquer, yes I will conquer them. Come on, let's conquer, oh I will conquer, rise up and conquer them.
Tell them no retreat, no surrender. I shall fight till the end of days. I was born as a Makai warrior, and the Almighty God my blade. Fire burn all Satan carrier. Father loose all shackles and chain. This morning first thing as I wake up, King David turned Sam to the brain. Don't let your courage go down, keep it up. And if your heart rip up and stitch it up, don't let your faith them fall, pick it up. When my cup was empty, God fill it up. Don't take the devil contract, rip it up. And if your bad mind people to go meet it up, pass me the Congo drum and let me beat it up. God on my side, me no give it up.
So no weapon that form against I shall not prevail. And no man that rise against I, that war they shall never win. 'Cause I will conquer, oh I will conquer, yes I will conquer them. God on my side, me no give it up. Oh I will conquer, rise up and conquer them.
Thank you, Father. I want to say thank you, Lord. You are everything, Father. Thank you.
Father, you alone shall guide me. No man shall lead my path. In the wind I hear your quiet whispers, and you heal my broken heart. Even some of my friends turn enemies, and they pray for right to fail. And remember you gave us your only begotten son, but we gave him the wound of love. Send down your warriors with the hello. They carry down to the end of days. No matter how the devil try trick me, unto you my soul I will give. Father, I know this storm is coming. I can see the high tide rage. Without you there is no other. Could it be that we is myself?
No weapon that form against I shall not prevail. And no man that rise against I, that war they shall never win. 'Cause I will conquer, oh I will conquer, yes I will conquer them. Come on, let's conquer, oh I will conquer, rise up and conquer them.
I am a man. I am a champion. I am a warrior. So who are you to tell me that I cannot make? Who are you to tell me that I am not the greatest thing that God ever created?
Good morning, Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. You're listening to Hard Talk Grenada. A very special good morning to those of you joining us on 97.5 CitysoundFM, 89.5 CRFM, 91.9 and 91.5 RealFM radio. the realest FM in Grenada, and 92.9 Sister Round Radio broadcasting from Hillsborough, Carriacou. And for those of you joining us in the diaspora through 94.9 We Noise Radio, a special good morning to those of you joining us on the live video, whether it's on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube, wherever you may be. Good morning. I know a lot of people have been anticipating this morning's program because they expect a lot to be discussed. And mind you, a lot will be discussed this morning. And in studio with me to have this discussion is none other than Mr. Bola. I see that look on your face. It's too early, eh? Good morning, Mr. Bola.
Good morning, Ms. Duncan. I hope you had a really wonderful and pleasant weekend. I see that you're smiling, your face is shining. I don't know if it is because of your weekend or because of a pleasant night's sleep, or is it because of my presence? But anyway, I like to say...
combination of the first two. I'm not sure about the last one yet.
Okay, I like to say a pleasant good morning to our listening audience, by whatever means you are listening. We are glad to have you joining us. We are preparing for discussions. As per usual, we try to make sure that the information we give you from this program is always factual, verifiable information, and information that is meant to educate, and elevate you from wherever you are. So let's get it going. Do have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful 2 hours with us, I hope.
All right. And Mr. Bola, I just want to let the public know that we are going to open the lines this morning, but we're going to open the lines at about 11 o'clock. All right. There's a lot for us, a lot of discourse that needs to happen first to begin the conversation. I also tried reaching out this morning to the Attorney General to see if I'm able to get him to make a statement. I know he was on Shaggy this morning. I know he was on RealFM this morning, and he was giving his legal insight into the bill. And to be honest, we are not going to delve into the actual bill itself and the contents thereof, because I would leave that for the legal minds to discuss and to really compound on. But I really have a problem this morning, Mr. Bola, with the approach. I want to speak about approach, and not just approach as it relates to the bill, or approach as it relates to the government, the policymakers, and not approach only as it relates to the public outcry. A combination of all. I want us to spend some time talking about it. Now, somebody just said that the studio is a little dark, so I want to try to fix that so that we have even lighting, Mr. Bola, and my face looks, it's more for me than for you. Yes, and that my face is well lit. I know you can see it well lit, but I'm not sure the people on the camera could see that. All right. Okay, Mr. Bola. Firstly, I want us to begin as a member of Parliament, a previous member of Parliament. I want us to talk about the process and the procedure as it is right now, as it relates to bills going to the Parliament, bills being drafted for the Parliament. I want us to take a moment to just touch on that issue. Now, I want to give my understanding, and of course, you are there to clarify, because I get a wealth of information out of you as it relates to how processes are. Now, in my mind, and from what I understand, when a bill is drafted by the legal minds, which would be associated with legal affairs, when that bill is drafted, it is then, drafted, of course, with the intention of going to Parliament. Now, once it gets to Parliament and goes through its first reading, at that point, it becomes public knowledge. At that point, the discussion starts as to the contents of the bill. Is it necessary? What the justifications behind what the contents of the bill are, and all of these things happen at that point, right? Now, I want us to break it down further. Now, once it gets to Parliament, it goes to the lower house. Correct me if I'm wrong. The lower house would be the House of Representatives. That comprises of the 15 representatives, or in our case now, the 14 representatives and the opposition. Once it gets to that point, it goes through the first reading, becomes public knowledge, but then it also has to go to the Senate for debate. So even though it goes through the first reading, or is expected to go through the first reading on Wednesday, or was expected to go through the first reading on Wednesday, it then does not mean that it is immediately passed. It must then go to the Senate. Now, in the Senate, we have representatives from government. We have now we have the opposition representatives, which include the Honorable, what's her name again? Sincere. And
Sinclair.
Sincere.
It's Sincere.
Sincere.
Okay.
And two others. We also have representative for business, representative for trade unions, representative for agriculture, I believe, and that would sum up the whole Senate. Now, the Senate can debate on the bill. The Senate can now identify areas of the bill that are of concern to civil society. So, for example, the trade union may identify that there are areas of the bill that infringes on the rights or goes or surpasses or goes against the Constitution, right? Or the opposition may do the same. And that bill now cannot be passed because there are areas of concern and must go back to the lower house. Am I correct?
Well, you are correct in many things that you've said. There are one or two things that just need further clarification. But in a general sense, I think you have an understanding of the procedures as it relates to Parliament. Now, firstly, when you said that after its first reading, the bill becomes a public document, it gets into the public domain. That is correct. But there can be consultation even before the first reading.
Okay.
Yes. Now, what tends to happen, depending on how far-reaching the effects of any bill can be, generally, when prepared or soon after drafting, or even in its drafting stages, the Attorney General and his team, which will comprise of the Legal Affairs Division, the legal minds and drafters and other persons that are there, they can, and generally for ease of getting bills through, can have consultation processes with what is referred to in that instance as interest groups. Yes?
Right.
So, take for example, a bill that may affect let's say medical workers. Let's use them as an example, just saying medical workers. You can have, even before that bill gets to Parliament, the legal team can go have discussions on what the intent of the bill is, or what is expected to the expected outcomes of the bill,
right,
with the medical professions. You can do it that way. They can also have, and they normally would, during my period of time as a cabinet member, before you go to Parliament, when you have a piece of legislation drafted, would send a team to the cabinet room where the discussions are being held and questions are asked and some sort of explanation is being given about the bill and what the bill seeks to do. Right. Now, that is even before you get to Parliament. So they can, and sometimes there should be, that kind of consultation before. But the general consultation with the public now comes or can come in after the first reading. Because first reading for a bill means presentation, laying of that document before the House, and then it becomes public. Right? Now, after that, before it goes to the other stages, the second and third stage, you can have a lot. And generally, what needs to happen when bills are presented in the Parliament is that you must have first reading. Right. And then there must be a delay. Up to 90 days, I think, if my memory serves me right, before you go into the second reading. There are times when you have bills, because of the urgency, you can seek the the authorization from the speaker.
Right.
Or you can announce to the speaker that you would want to crave his indulgence in allowing you, that is now the presenter of the bill in the parliament, to allow you to take the bill through all its stages at that sitting and explain why it is necessary. So there are times, especially when you're doing, for example, amendments and so to bill. So you have the principal act there, the principle is there, but you need to do some kind of adjustments. You
Right.
need to make a change, one or two. And sometimes changes just simply mean removing a sentence or a word or replacing that word with something else. To amend the bill to give it greater clarity or so, or to cover a wider space. Generally, during those times, you can ask to take it through all its stages,
Right.
amendments and so. Very seldom you have bills that have far-reaching implication going through all the stages at one sitting. Very seldom. It has happened in the past, but very seldom. So, as you rightly said, you go through. So after the first reading, the expectation is that the public now can weigh in,
Right.
can start giving their feelings, talking, reaching out to the parliamentary rep. And saying parliamentary rep, you did say earlier on that in our case now we have 14 representatives and an opposition. We still have 15 representatives. One of them is opposition.
Right.
But once you are in the lower house, you have been voted in, you are a representative, whether you sit with government or opposition. Yes?
Right.
So we still have, I guess it's just when you're talking there, you just seem to remember, oh no, we have an opposition leader.
Yeah.
It is true. A member of the opposition, but that member is also a representative. Yes. So, that is when now you can dialogue. That is when representatives can probably have these little town halls or streetlight meetings. Because if a bill is creating a lot of traction, if what
Right.
you're trying to get passed in Parliament to enact is creating a lot of discourse at the public level, at the village level, at the community level, throughout the country, it is incumbent then on representatives,
Right.
with whatever understanding they have of the bill, what it seeks to do and what
Right.
they're seeking to have the parliament enact, to go out there now and start having these discussions, these debates,
Right.
letting people air their views, and you take notes. Now, having done that, the second reading of the bill is when you have the real discussion on the bill. That is when reps can speak on the bill. You generally don't speak on the first reading.
Right.
You speak on the second reading.
Right.
You talk now from an informed position, because as a representative of government, you had the benefit of hearing what the legal team had to say.
Right.
You had the benefit of reading the bill over time. You had the benefit of having discussed with your constituents, with other interest groups, with ministerial personnel, and weighing in on what different people say. So in your presentation now, you can express on their behalf the feelings that you get. Now,
Right.
when that is done and concluded, you go now into what is referred to as the third reading, and it is at this stage of the bill you can effect changes,
Okay.
because during the third reading is when you take the bill part by part, as they may call it, or clause by clause,
Right.
or article by article, because sometimes you have articles, you have clauses, and it depends on how extensive the bill is, you will determine how you take it. Yes?
Right.
And at that stage, you can now point out, Mr. Speaker, we would like to see this word removed or this number removed. So, for example, if it's a bill that speaks, and we're just giving examples here, that speaks to having punishment if you break a certain law. Mm-hmm. And generally in the law, in enacting, they may say imprisonment for a period not less than 6 months.
Right.
Right? But at that stage, based on all the discourse you have, you may want to ask that you remove 6 months and put 12 months or put 24 months, because people feel that 6 months is not sufficient time.
Right.
So not less than, or you can say not more than as well, because they generally do not stick. Because in enacting or passing, because in Parliament you pass, you enact when the Governor General signs. And consent to.
Right.
In passing a bill, in terms of time span, they normally want to leave a certain leeway for the magistrates and judges to use their own discretion.
Okay.
Right? So you may say a fine of $5,000, but most times you may hear the bill say a fine not more than or not less than.
Right.
So it gives that leeway depending on the situation and depending on the evidence that is presented and the cause for that. The magistrate may say the maximum is 5,000, but I'll charge you 3.
Okay.
Or if it says not less than 3, they say, well, all right, I can't go under 3, so I can either charge you the lowest amount, which is 3,000, or I can take it up.
Right.
So it still gives room for if there is a court case.
Right.
Right. So all of that. But in terms of what you specifically want to know, yes, you can effect changes at the lower house during the third reading when you're taking the bill. That's now you're tearing the bill apart.
Right.
You're taking it part by part. So you go on page 1 and you take Article 1. Would there be any changes in Article 1? Article 2 or Clause 1, Clause 2, and you go part by part in the Parliament. Now, if it's passed with changes, the changes will be effected.
Right.
Because in writing up, so you say the bill was passed at Parliament sitting on such and such date with changes to Clause 1, Clause 5, Clause 10, and in the notes and the recordings, they will say what the changes are. That then goes back to legal affairs and the drafters who put the bill together, and they are oftentimes sitting in the Parliament when a new bill is going. They are there taking their notes as well.
Right.
So whatever the changes that are made, and there are times in going through the discussion of the bill, you may call, the speaker may call on the legal team, the legal people who drafted, for further explanation.
Right.
Because there may be a clause that the political personnel who are there to pass that bill may want greater explanation. So they are seated there, or sometimes the attorney generally seated there, not as a parliamentarian, but on the side, just in case. And they take the notes. So if changes were made or effected during the passage of the bill, they then goes back and rectify and make those changes. So by the time it goes to the upper house, which is the Senate, it goes to the Senate with the changes that was made in the lower house. Now, if in the mind of the Senate sufficient changes was not made, or because the Senate is another section of the house, that's why they call them the houses of Parliament. You have the lower and the upper.
Right.
Or if no change was made at all, but like the representatives in the lower house, they have had their own dialogue, they have had their own consultation, they have had discussions with varying people, and in their own mind they believe that some changes should be effected. They can also do that, because in the Senate you go through the different stages as well, just
Right.
like you go through in the House of Representatives. Now mind you, even if the House of Representatives did not make changes, but the Senate cite changes that can be made
Right.
for the betterment of the bill, they will record that, and that bill will be reverted back
To the lower house.
to the lower house to say, look, at the Senate level, we recognize and wants to effect changes here, there. And there must be some level of consultation.
Right.
And most of the times, the House of Representatives accept or assent to what the Senate says, and they will go back, the bill will go back to Parliament, and the changes will be effected. Yes?
Right.
So you have many stages in the discussion. Now, even, like I said, even before it goes to Parliament, there are certain interest groups. So, for example, the Bar Association is one such interest group that generally if the legal department who draft bills believe that bill has sufficient, as they may call in their own language, veracity, it is strong enough to create problems, they generally will have an audience with the Bar Association to say, this is what we're proposing, and to have the legal minds weigh in on what they think may be good enough or not very good enough.
Okay,
Yes?
Mr. Paul, I want to quickly take this call because I'm expecting a very important call and I don't want it to be missed. Hello, good morning.
Hi, you mind if I get a call back?
Yes, please. At sometime past 11, we'll be taking calls from the general public.
Good.
Okay, great. Yes, Mr. Paul, go ahead.
Right. So even at that, even like I said, before going to Parliament to get its first reading, the bill in its draft stage, in its very basic stages, there can be and should be in most instances consultation with these interest groups, and the Bar Association could be one and should and generally is one. You also have the Trade Union Council. You have the Conference of Churches. You have what this government had put in place since they came in, having won all the parliamentary seats, the tripartite organization, which they meet with, I think, once or twice per month, which consists of representatives from the trade union, the business community, the churches, and different things like that. So.
All right, Mr. Bola, let's take this call because I'm assuming that this is whom we need to speak to. Hello, good morning.
Hi, good morning. This is Darshan Ramdani. Who am I speaking with?
Hi, good morning, Mr. Ramdani. You're speaking with Ms. Duncan and Mr. Bola here on Hard Talk Live, and you are already live on the radio.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning to all your viewers.
Good morning, sir.
Yes.
All right. Now, Mr. Ramdani, we have so much to talk about, and I know your time is limited. So I want to go directly or straight to the point as it relates to the bill. Now, Mr. Bola, I don't know if you have any initial questions that you want to ask him, or if Mr. Ramdani would like to make his initial statement first.
We should allow him to.
Hello?
Sorry, I missed the last part of that.
Okay. Would you like to go ahead and make your initial statement? I know there has been a lot of discourse over the weekend as it relates to this bill that is proposed before Parliament. There are a lot of viewpoints and a lot of opinions as it relates to the bill. Can you give us an idea or some rationale as to what is the mindset of the legal team when putting this bill together?
All right. Thank you for that, Ms. Duncan, Mr. Bola.
Morning, sir.
And thank you for having me on this program. I'm glad to be here. This is an important matter that needs, I think, to be addressed. I did expect a sort of a major tropical storm over the weekend, and instead of a tropical storm, we had a media sort of
media storm
agitation, as it were. But it is a serious matter which deserves serious attention. Let me say quickly that the bill, in large part, that we have drafted contains the policy directions which are guided in large part by the regulations and the experience on the ground that we have gathered over the last 4 months. In other words, what I'm saying, if you look at the regulations which have been passed almost replaced every week over this period, you will see a number of the provisions in the regulations are the identical provisions which are contained in the bill, and these and we have also inserted in the bill certain mechanisms to cater for certain contingencies or situations that may arise on the way forward. As you know, when we started in March to manage the COVID-19 environment, it started with a declaration of a state of emergency. We continue to have a state of emergency in place in Grenada, and these regulations that are in force are passed under the Emergency Powers Act, which works in tandem with Section 17 of the Grenada Constitution, where the power to declare a state of emergency begins. And so it is only in that state of emergency were we able to utilize the regulatory making powers given to Cabinet, and the Cabinet was able to pass all these regulations which currently exist to manage to to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. And I'm sure you, all your viewers, or most of them, will agree that we have done, we have no cases, and we have managed to keep Grenada safe throughout this period when other first world countries and other countries are struggling to deal with the virus within their borders. And so these regulations played a very important part in keeping Grenada safe. We put measures such as closing businesses that were from operating physically. We, except for those which were given permission, essential services and other businesses which were given permission to operate, either by expressly mentioning them in the regulations or by giving permission through the Commissioner of Police acting under the direction of Cabinet. And we created regulations. Regulations also catered for the social physical distancing that took place. It also catered for wearing of masks. And these closing the borders initially. Initially, you remember we had a curfew in place. And these were very important measures at the beginning, and throughout the period we have been evolving them, and we have been relaxing, easing on the restrictions, because these restrictions have been affecting all of us.
Right.
And no government that is keen on protecting its people should ever do so without also considering what impact these measures will have on people's lives. And this is the balance that we must strike. The balance that we must strike is that we have to safeguard against the effects or the spread of the coronavirus.
Right.
And at the same time, the measures that we take must only go so far in terms of restricting fundamental rights and what not, to ensure we go no further than that. Hence, you have seen how the regulations have evolved. But ultimately, these regulations continue to be passed by Cabinet, who has been given power by the Act, the Emergency Powers Act through the Constitution. But when we started this process, there were some comments being made that we should not have done this by regulations. We should have gone to Parliament. Now, the time when we did this, there was a pressing urgency on the state of Grenada. And this was not something that we lightly chose to do, to go to regulation-making powers that Cabinet possessed. I mean, these are lawful powers given.
Right.
But properly in governing and managing this process, now that we are 4 months into it, it was considered by Cabinet and the policymakers that maybe it is time for us to get to Parliament. And you know, throughout this period, we have been listening to the feedback. We have been getting comments. You've seen newspaper articles being written about our regulations, the regulations that govern our lives. You've seen people on television speaking about it on the social platform. And all of these have been taken on board, as well as the medical and scientific evidence that we have been gathering throughout the period. All these experiences were considered in crafting the policy that is reflected in the bill, yes? And so when you look at the bill and you place it side by side with the regulation, they almost resemble each other except for certain things which actually relaxes some more of situations, some more aspects of governance in relation to COVID-19 environment. You would know by now that the government has taken a decision based on the feedback that we got over the weekend to delay taking this bill to Parliament. I think that's a good move. I think the government has responded appropriately to the comments and the criticism, and there has been some anxiety. Yes, we are affecting fundamental rights, and this is a very important matter. So I agree that we have embarked on a useful process. Perhaps in hindsight, it's something that we should have done from the beginning, but we felt that since we were dealing with the same issues and we had the regulations are largely the same as what the bill represents, it is time for the people of Grenada to listen to their elected officials, to stand in Parliament and to tell them exactly why these measures are important. The very measures that are in place in regulations.
Okay,
yeah?
Okay, thank you so much for that. I want us to touch quickly, because I did hear you on several of the programs this morning explaining and justifying the reasoning behind some of these. But there is particular pieces of the legislation that persons are concerned with. And for example, let's go to a section that reads, during the period of emergency, the Cabinet may make regulations for the purpose of controlling and regulating all means of communication and transport or fuel, building plants, and material necessary for working of the same, all food and liquor supplies and necessaries, all electric, water, and other power stations. Can you break that down a little bit for us so that we understand the context behind which this section is written?
Well, if you recall my earlier statement that we are operating presently under a state of emergency, and that state of emergency was made possible by a declaration issued by the Governor General in accordance with Section 3 of the Emergency Powers Act, Chapter 88, yes? And in accordance with Section 17 of the Grenada Constitution. Now, if you look at the actual bill that I believe you have in front of you, you will see that that section is not triggered. That provision that you read, even if that bill in its present form becomes law, those provisions are not triggered at all until and unless we again declare a state of emergency. When this bill, if this bill becomes law in whatever form or fashion as is contemplated at the moment, it will literally require that the declaration of emergency, which is presently in effect, that declaration will be recalled, and these substantive provisions which allow the government to do contact tracing, to have people wear masks, those provisions will be given life under that act without the need for a declaration or a state of emergency. So the provision you are reading will only come into play if, for instance, let's say, God forbid, months down the road, we have cases in Grenada and there's a need to implement curfew. Then again, I expect that where it is proper and appropriate to do so, the GG will issue another state of declaration, and then those provisions are kicked in, because those provisions are identical to provisions which currently exist in the Emergency Powers Act. It is simply put in this act so we can have one comprehensive act to deal with all possibilities.
Okay.
So what you're reading, hold on, sorry, I want to finish this point. It's very important, because people might say, well, why in an emergency will you want to be able to control certain supplies and such like things? My answer to them is this, that it is not inconceivable that at all that the Emergency Powers Act that presently exists contemplates emergencies. So if you're dealing with a state of emergency, it may be that your borders might be closed. You might not be getting supplies of goods and goods coming into the country. Food stuff might not come in. Medical equipment may not come into the country. And you may have, I'm not saying this will happen in Grenada, but this is how law is constructed to cater for these kinds of situations. You may have a situation where the hospital has run out of medical testing facilities, but you have a private facility in the country that has these facilities available. And maybe they have shut their doors and they're not dispensing it in keeping with the public good. Yes? Right. And so in those kind of situations, the government in emergency situations only, and this is currently our law. Right now, you don't need to pass this act to be given that power in an emergency. Right now, in an emergency, as currently exists, these powers are already granted to the Cabinet under Chapter 88, already granted. But they're not being utilized because those powers are not, it's not right and appropriate to deal with those powers yet at all. Yes? It only arises if all food stuff had stopped coming into the country and it was important to access, let's say, warehouses or supermarkets that were closed so we could distribute food to the public which were being affected and were not getting access to essential supplies to life. And that's the whole point of an emergency. Well, one of the structures that is available within an emergency declaration, you're catering that things are not going to be normal, that supplies and goods and so on will not be available to people in the normal way. and some people who are disadvantaged may not be able to access it. And any government throughout the world, if you look at all of every country, a democratic country, there are laws like this on their books that allows the government in states of emergencies, yes, where you have a state of emergency, to trigger these laws. What we are trying to do with this bill is to actually perhaps get away from a state of emergency, but to provide for substantive laws which will allow us to do these various things. Let me sort of recite what it is that we are trying to do. Yes, for instance, do you believe it is reasonable that people get tested who come into the airports? I believe the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Do you believe that it is reasonable that we have the power to trace people? Yes, to do contact tracing. I believe the answer is yes. Once we are having people come into our borders,
right.
Do you think it's reasonable to require people to be socially distanced? I believe the answer to that presently is yes. Do you require that certain businesses that will not be able to comply with protocols, physical distancing protocols, be closed? I believe a lot of reasonable people will say yes. Do you believe that people should physically distance themselves? I think I mentioned that. I believe the answer to yes is yes. Do you believe that gatherings should not be allowed in certain numbers of persons? Do you believe that the police force should be given some power to support the health authorities to enforce these laws to protect us? And this is our current environment. And I believe your answer to these questions, our answer to these questions, should be a collective yes.
Yeah.
Because we have seen these regulations at work. We have seen, I know, we have all seen people who have walked around without masks.
Mm-hmm.
We've all seen gatherings up at Batway, seen videos of them, that is. I haven't been there personally. But I wish to say that this has been a wearying time for some of us, many of us, perhaps all of us. These are sacrifices that we are making to ensure that we come out on the other end safe and intact without being affected by the coronavirus. And this is why these regulations are in place. And this is the reason why that believe that the conversation on the basis and the need for such regulations be taken at the level of Parliament. What that bill represents is exactly what those regulations are saying. The structure of the emergency declaration is already in the Emergency Powers Act. But none of our current laws provide for a holistic approach to managing coronavirus.
Right.
None of our current laws do that. The public health laws are there. You could amend and put some regulations in place. But what you would have to do, you would then have to wade through that act and search through exactly what has happened when you put two sections in one part of the act. You amend 5 sections. In another part, you amend 6 sections. And then we will have to go to that whole act to see, well, what is happening here in relation to coronavirus. We thought that you could separate this management process for coronavirus alone.
Right.
We could create a bill and an act for coronavirus alone. So everyone, lawyers, politicians, all stakeholders, people in the public health industry, people in the airport industry, the ordinary public, the general public will be able to look at one document. Yes? Mm-hmm. People like yourself who sit in very important places like the media houses, you will have one document. You wouldn't have to, yes, you may consult some attorneys along the way, have discussions, these discussions, but you will have one document to turn the pages on and to see what are the duties and responsibilities of the government, what are the powers given to the various departments at work here, the Ministry of Health, the Ports Authority, the executive and the police department. You see clearly what are the powers we are discussing and what are the powers that are going to be given. You see the obligations of the public. They have to physically distance themselves. They have to wear masks. They have to allow them to obey lawful instructions to be quarantined wherever this is considered necessary. So you look at one document, because I have heard a comment being made, why don't we go and amend our public health laws and put it in there? But when you think it through, this has been a management, how to put it, the COVID-19 environment has been a management nightmare. No one has ever expected to have something like COVID-19 descend on Grenada, on the world.
Right.
Look at how other countries are struggling to manage COVID-19 issues. Look at how they're getting it wrong. Look at how lives are being lost. And Grenada has managed to utilize this legislative landscape, these regulations, and we have kept Grenadians, all of us have come together and we have worked and we have used this legislative landscape to keep Grenadians safe. When you look at it and you actually can see these provisions are working. They're working. You're going down the road. You yourself, Ms. Duncan, Mr. Bowler, when you go down the road and you see someone without a mask, what is your first thought? When you go into supermarkets and you see people at the counters, when this thing started, I went into one of the drugstores on the island. We hadn't gotten regulations yet. And I was looking at the cashiers at the counters. We knew that there were possibly persons on the island with being infected at that stage. We believed that. And I spoke to management in one of them and said, your cashiers who are in a drugstore, people are coming here. This is a pharmacy. People are coming here not because they're healthy, or, well, at least many of them coming here are possibly thinking they're getting sick. They're trying to take care of a symptom. Yes? And your cashier should not be without a mask or without a glove. You should have some sanitizers there. This was before we had regulations. Maybe I am one of the anxious persons. Forgive me. But later on, they have put those very same measures in. Yes? And so it is common. How to put it this way? Forgive me for going on like that. But what I'm trying to say essentially is that our regulations have been working. Our regulations have helped with the assistance, the cooperation of the people in Grenada. Without the people's cooperation, this cannot work. And this is why I believe the government has decided to recall taking this bill to Parliament on Wednesday. Because whatever we attempt to put into law must be a law which secures the cooperation of the general public. And when these questions are being raised of breaches of fundamental rights, I believe this is a necessary conversation that must take place to restore some degree of calmness in those pockets where people have become anxious. And so I am grateful to be able to be engaged in this conversation. In hindsight, we should have started, I suspect, even though we were going to do the same thing.
Yes.
Well, we are here now, aren't we?
Aren't we? Mr. Bola, before you go, I just want to backpedal just a little bit for the sake of the public. If you know me, you know I like to use practical examples so that people better understand. Based on what you said earlier, this COVID-19 control bill can only be enforced, for example, in a situation where COVID-19 does not exist. The clause that speaks about police being able to enter your home without a warrant, that cannot stand or will not stand. And if it is not of an issue dealing with COVID-19, then it becomes illegal. Is that what you're saying?
No, I think you have taken me in a slight circle there. But let me phrase the question I believe you're asking me. You're asking me whether that provision that gives power to the police to enter premises, if that in any scenario can be lawful without COVID-19 affecting a country.
Right.
Now, let me say this to you, that what you see in the bill, giving the power to the police, you will see that the police doesn't simply exercise this power on his own say-so. Mm-hmm. This power, if you look at it, how it is crafted, it is only exercised when a lawful instruction or order is given or imposed on anyone under the Act. And who are the persons to do that? They are the public health officials. Right. So when the public health officials give you an instruction, perhaps to quarantine yourself, to comply with this instruction, to come for screening and testing, to submit yourself to a test, and you fail to do that, then the public health officer can decide that we need to require you to get this done. Someone comes in at the airport and they come without a medical declaration form. Let's say somebody slips through the crack, and the public health official that is there says, you have to be tested. The person says, no, I'm not going to be tested. I want to get into Grenada. I want to go to my house.
Right.
Yes? A sensible law protecting Grenadians must have the facility to say that a police officer or someone should be able to hold that person and say, no, I have to hold you and I have to require you to submit yourself to this test. Mm-hmm. Or we quarantine you for 14 days. One of these things will have to take place at that point. Mm-hmm. And so a law must be in place, and it is only then. Now, in relation to entry of premises, right? Let's go to entry of premises, which you're seeing here. I am again saying that when the police officer is exercising power under this provision, it relates to whenever the public health officials have given you an instruction or you're required to do something under this act and you haven't done so, which is usually related to what the public health is managing this act, yes? And so you have been declared, you have been tested and you have been found to be positive from the coronavirus, yes? Imagine a scenario, terrible scenario, God forbid, and you have been asked to quarantine yourself and you have been told to self-isolate at your home, yes? However that has happened, you're in your home. And you decided now you want to call a party. And you probably heard me give this example this morning. I think it's a relevant example. So forgive me if you have heard it before. You want to call a party and you've invited 15 persons to come to your houses and they all got into the house and they're inside your house and your neighbors call the police station. Now, in the regular world, I would like to always think that the police officers must get a warrant to enter premises. Yes? You call up a judge if you can find him. Well, that might be the problem. You may find him or you may not. The judge may ask for more things. But in the meantime, a crime is occurring in that home.
Right.
A crime is actually occurring. This example I'm presenting to you is where 15 persons are suddenly at risk of being put in harm's way and possibly death. Right? And the police force knows this. And, I will tell you this. I think you also may have heard it if you listened to me this morning at other talk shows. We presently have the Quarantine Act in Grenada. It's an act that has been passed a long time ago. And that act has this exact same provision.
Right.
Word for word. Now, we didn't cut and paste it simply because it's there. We analyzed it in the context of the Constitution. And the Constitution gives every person a right to the protection of their home. You can't enter a man's home, and that's a protected right, unless a law authorizes the entry. Unless the law that authorizes the entry is reasonably required.
Right.
So the Constitution gives these exceptions. It says, yes, the right for your home not to be entered into. It's a right that is given by Section 7 of the Constitution, right? It says, except with his own consent, no person shall be subjected to the search of his person or his property or the entry by others on his premises. But that same section go on to allow laws to be passed that allow people to enter your premises once these laws are reasonably required. Now, I pose the question, do you not believe that it may be reasonably required in a very, very bad COVID environment where somebody has broken the law, they're in their homes, and they've invited other unsuspecting persons to enter their homes, and a police officer said, or the parliament thinks to itself, you know what, as policymakers, we want to be able to allow, in those circumstances, a police officer to be able to enter that house without having to wait. A crime is being committed. Our laws presently state, our laws, the common law which is supported by the Constitution, says that if you see a man committing a crime, the police officer chases him and he runs. And the police officer continues in hot pursuit. And he runs into his home and closes his door. Our laws give the police officer the power to use force to get into that door because we are in the process of chasing a man from running away from the commission of a crime. The law already supports that. Our law already supports this position. Right. So the way this is structured in this bill and the way it is structured in the regulations which currently exist and the way it is structured in the Quarantine Act which currently exists is a recognized concept that in real, terrible, disastrous circumstances, these powers may be available to be exercised. You have never heard, I am sure, of anyone saying that the police officers abuse the Quarantine Act. Yes, have you? Have you ever heard that? I mean, we have had cases of allegations being made against police officers for abuse of powers in the past. For various reasons, some of them have been proven to be true, sad but true. Those officers have been dealt with in accordance with law. But we are dealing with people, yes? And so we have captured this structure as a policy measure in this bill, but it hasn't become laws yet. And I'm hoping that these conversations, these discussions, this consultation, ongoing consultation process with all persons will perhaps make a decision on whether it remains in its present form or whether we want to tweak it, whether we want to say something more in relation to it or we're happy the way it is. Okay. These are the discussions that we are presently involved in. And so that section is not an unknown section to the law in many countries, and it's clearly not an unknown section to the law of Grenada prior to COVID-19.
Okay,
It's
I think Mr. Bola.
exactly the same words.
I think Mr. Bola has a question.
You're right. Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Ramdani, you have established, and I think I heard you on one of the other talk shows, as you said this morning, has established that there are varying laws that are already enacted in our country that give certain legality to most of what this present bill is asking for. You spoke of the Constitution and varying parts of the Constitution, Public Health Act, the Quarantine Act, and there are others. So I believe it's a coming together of a lot of various pieces, which maybe a lot of our public people who make pronouncements did not know. And we oftentimes say on this program here, even when you hear something, try and verify before you spread. We say that, but it doesn't always happen. I just wanted to know from you, are there any other jurisdiction within our region or the sub-region? I think you mentioned this morning that it occurs, there is a similar piece of legislation in England, but within the sub-region, is there any jurisdiction that you can point to that has a similar piece of legislation in place? Because we always like to know of examples. That's one. But secondly, and I think you alluded to that, I think this should be a learning experience for us, where we know now that maybe some level of consultation, or at least a bit of education. I think the world has become a place where we don't read a lot again. Everything now is exposed on Facebook and Twitter and wherever else. Truth, not so true, fantasy, everything is there, and people take everything wholesale. So would you agree with us that maybe futuristically that we need to have some kind of discourse, or like you're doing now, whether it's you or any other person from the legal team, prior to something, a bill going forward, may need to give some kind of explanation, let the public have a little more knowledge so we can avoid some of the concerns that are being raised now?
You know, Mr. Bola, I want to agree with you. I do believe, and you know, we have been doing consultation processes. Yes, like for instance, many months ago, we were seeking to amend some of the provisions relating to sexual offences in the criminal code, and we had a draft bill done representing a certain policy position, and that was sent out as a draft bill to the Bar Association. We're still in the consultation process related to that, and I look forward to getting feedback in relation to that consultation process. But that was how the bar got wind that we were going to do changes relating to defendants' rights and children rights and all of that. We were seeking to amend certain things to give greater protection to children and victims of sexual offences. And so we sent that out, but yet there were persons who said that how could we have gone ahead and drafted something without consulting first? Now, these are processes, and if you get consultation on something, or you consult on something, why should there be a complaint that you have gone ahead and drafted? You have consulted. Nothing is set in stone. Nothing is set in stone. When I say to you, here is a document, I want you to consult on this. At least one could say that I have taken time out, our departments have taken time out to actually flesh through the learning around the world, to examine the learning around the world, to look at the learning in the region, and we have come up with something which represents what human rights standards are in relation to protecting children and women and victims. And we have put together a package represented in the bill, but tell us your thoughts and tell us why this is wrong and that is wrong. That's one way to do it. So we have been doing it. Look, the nutmeg merger issue, that is also another matter that the Minister of Agriculture is presently engaged in consultations on, and yet you may hear a murmur here and there that it's not sufficient. I do agree with you, Mr. Bowler, that when you come to serious matters, I mean, if you're doing an amendment to some, to correct some error in a law, or you're doing amendments that relate to some technical point which doesn't affect rights, perhaps you may want to present that as a bill and have it debated in Parliament, and the public gets to hear the debate, and or perhaps even after a session of Parliament. And this is one method of consultation. Perhaps after a first reading of a bill, the public gets to hear what is the government doing in Parliament, and then they get to speak to their elected members. And having spoken to their elected members realize, what, my constituency is not very happy with us at all. They get back to cabinet, they sit down and they decide, what we have presented there, even though we didn't consult initially, I'm getting so much feedback from the ground. The groundswell is so much that we need to change this process. These are all different aspects of consultation. You are right, Mr. Bowler. I do believe that serious matters which affect people's lives, fundamental rights, these are matters which there should be a proper process of consultation. And the government has listened to the persons who were speaking over the weekend. And we decided on Sunday to recall the bill from Parliament and to continue to engage. We did think that it was the same process, the same regulations that we were implementing now, and they were going to be debated at a national level so that the general public, all members, could get to hear what it is. But we are where we are, and I am for one very heartened by the fact that I think these consultations are going to be meaningful. Let me answer the first part of your question, whether there are other countries in the region that have similar legislation. I don't believe so. We have looked and examined the regulations. In fact, only this week, today, I have been in discussions with one Attorney General's chamber in one of the territories, and they have been asking for our guidance in relation to how we have addressed certain matters such as contact tracing. They are struggling with that because in their jurisdiction, there's a question of whether it affects privacy rights, and I have to suggest and submit to them that whatever laws and fundamental rights you have in place, these rights are not absolute. And when you have a pressing, urgent need to impose limitation on these fundamental rights, the Constitution gives you that power to allow Parliament to make incursions into these rights, to limit these rights. And so, for instance, I would have thought that if contact tracing was a very, very important thing that might save lives, then any right to privacy that you could possess must be limited by the very Constitution that allows you to safeguard the public's interest. And our Constitution is crafted in that manner, that every time you see a fundamental right being discussed and protected, the Constitution, by the very same provision, allow Parliament to make laws which will limit the absolute nature of the fundamental right, once those laws are reasonably required to protect public safety, public order, public health, among other things. Yes? So the region is this is something completely new for many of us. We are old in the law, Mr. Bowler. We are very old in the law, but these are new and trying circumstances, and along the way we may have a little stumble here and there, but by and large the measure in our success in dealing with this will have to be an examination of where we are. Yes, you must look at our regulations and examine where we are. You must look to see how every nation is struggling with this. You must look to see how the lawmakers are getting challenges that they have never faced before in relation to these kinds of national emergencies. These are challenges for all of us. I have been fortunate. Members of the bar have called me from time to time and have given me suggestions. I'm grateful for those suggestions. Some of them have been critical, some of them have been constructive, and I'm grateful for all of that, because sometimes even the not so constructive criticism can inure to the benefit of all of us. You get a chance to think through what you have done. You listen to these constructive criticisms, you listen to the not so constructive one that you thought initially was not constructive, and it ends up being something that really can guide you on the way forward. So, as I've said to you, Attorney General chambers have reached out to me. We have spoken to some of them, and we are all trying to navigate our way across this process. And so I believe the record will show that we have done well so far, if only on measuring how that we have no cases and that we continue to remain without at least the medical effects of the coronavirus, because we have been affected significantly socially, economically, and otherwise. But at least right now, there are no known cases in Grenada. It is a process that we are managing. Yes? I would say to you as well that it is not... I don't like to think that a country should only do something because somebody else has done it. And I also don't say that we should go and do it because we want to be the first to do it. I think we need to look at our individual needs, our present circumstances, and decide that whether this is the right time for this matter to be discussed at the national level in Parliament. And it was the policymakers' belief that we would like to have that national discussion. Let the public know. People know regulations have been passed. People know regulations are in place. But if you stop the ordinary man and you ask him what are the regulations saying, he only hears what is being said on the news. And these debates in Parliament add something to the national discourse. They bring an element of inclusivity. People get a chance to say, well, my elected official is there in Parliament speaking about this. My senator or senator representing my group is there speaking about this. And they get a chance to themselves speak on social platforms. Ordinary citizens are able to do that. And so this is how the democratic process works. I am so comforted that we all live in a society that the democratic process works as well as it does. And so one good thing coming out of the anxiety over the weekend is that you, Mr. Bola, and you, Ms. Duncan, are now engaged in a conversation. We are engaged in a conversation that reminds everyone how serious the coronavirus issue is for all of us. It reminds everyone, this now is back as a topic of national discussion. So we have gotten a benefit already from these discussions. People, possibly lots of persons are listening to your program, and they will remind themselves they have to wear masks. They have to physically distance themselves. Yes? Mm-hmm. Because I believe a lot of us, or if not all of us, will see the sense in these measures that have been implemented over the past 4 months.
Yeah. So just quickly, for the benefit of those of us who does not have a comprehensive understanding, there has been regulations, quote unquote, utilizing the powers under the Constitution and the Emergency Powers Act. But now we're trying to make that into law. What is the basic difference here between having something legislated by Parliament and having regulations done by Cabinet? If you can just explain that to us.
I am grateful for that question, Mr. Bola. I think it is a question which I will continue to address over this week and as we continue to have this discussion. Legislation and laws which govern people start out from Parliament. There are three arms of government. It's the executive, which manages and carries out the mandates of the law. There is the judiciary, which resolves dispute and interprets the law. And there's Parliament, which passes law. But you will notice that when you get to delegated legislation, Parliament can pass a law, but Parliament can give the Cabinet power to pass regulations. And so Cabinet has a power, like the Emergency Powers Act has given Cabinet the power, which has enabled Cabinet to pass these regulations. So Cabinet sits down, and they decide on what policy measures, what protective measures are to be implemented, and they pass those measures, and they put them in place. So if you were to think that Parliament is the supreme maker of laws, Parliament is delegating some of these functions to the executive of government. Ideally, when you have a basic governance structure dealing with a significant area of public life, the substantive portions of that law should be set out in Parliament. Yes? And the minute details or the details, the mechanisms for the actual management of the process is really where the executive should come in. That's the structure of the Emergency Powers Act, The Emergency Powers Act says, in a case of emergency, I am giving powers to the Cabinet for the Cabinet to flesh this out. What the COVID-19 Act is doing is taking the COVID-19 environment, like the Public Health Act, the COVID-19 environment, and saying these basic fundamentals are going to be put in place. Masks must be wear, physical distances must be in place, social gatherings must be managed in accordance to how Cabinet directs. And so if you look at the bill in front of you, you will see, as far as social gatherings are concerned, the bill sets up the basic management structure. That yes, there's going to be some restrictions on social gatherings. Be alert, public. There are going to be some restrictions, but those restrictions will be determined in accordance to the decisions made by Cabinet. So Cabinet has a running job now to perform, and running obligation on a weekly basis to assess, can we allow weddings to have more than 50 persons this week? How is it showing? How is it looking? Are we able to relax it some more? So Cabinet makes an order next month and says, yes, you can have weddings with as many persons as you wish. Or, on the other hand, we have a case in Grenada, God forbid, and Cabinet decides, you know what, I need to exercise some power here to manage this particular scenario. I've been given general power to manage the COVID-19, and I've been given a general power to manage gatherings. But I now have to decide what numbers, based on the medical information that I'm getting from the Ministry of Health. I do believe we have to limit numbers down to 20 again, or to 10. And this is the relationship between substantive laws in Parliament and delegated laws. And what substantive laws really does, right? It allows the general public to listen to parliamentarians discuss these laws as they're about to pass them. When Cabinet is making decisions on delegated legislation, what happens is that Cabinet makes these decisions, and when the public becomes aware of it is when it is passed into law. Yes? And so it would be, I would have thought that it would always be better that if you're going to implement a management structure for COVID-19 issue, that could be started with a substantive structure be put in place, and then you have regulations flowing from that. Now, we didn't do that in the beginning, as I explained before, because we had an urgent, pressing need to get to action. We would have had to convene Parliament. Perhaps somebody would have wanted consultation at the beginning before we went to Parliament. I'm not sure. But that would have been a whole other discussion taking place. What Parliament envisaged under the Emergency Powers Act was to cater for emergency situations. But even the Emergency Powers Act does not give us all of the structures in one document that we need to handle. So we believed that we needed to put an act in place that the public will hear discussions on. Yes? Hear discussions on and be able to understand clearly, well, what are my parliamentarians doing? We thought so, because we have been running with regulations and it has been working well so far.
All right.
But this is how lawmaking is. You have these tiers of legislative making powers.
Maybe that may be the last one from me, Mr. Ramdani. Now, I have not read the bill in its entirety, right? So now you legislate, it becomes law, it's there on the book. 6 months down the road, the world has found a cure. We've dealt with COVID-19. It's no longer an issue. Not just a pandemic, but it's no longer an issue for us. What happens to that bill? Because we didn't say it's sunset legislation, right? And based on my little understanding, sunset legislation means that a law is put in place, passed by Parliament for a period of time. Is that the case?
Sorry, I missed that last part. A law is passed by Parliament for what?
I said sunset legislation sometimes refers to laws being passed, but for a specific time, a specific period. I don't know if this piece of legislation is seen in that light as sunset legislation, but I'm just saying for the benefit of the discussion, what happens 6 months, 8 months, 10 years down, 10 months down the road? Corona is off the market. We don't have any issue with it again. What happens to the legislation?
It's a very important question, Mr. Bola. A very important question, and I will provide you with the answer this way. I hope that makes good sense to your listeners. Presently, let me start here. Presently, the bill as drafted actually sets it up to last for 1 year.
Okay.
Yes? And so at the end of 1 year, it will expire unless Parliament agrees to extend it. Second point is that this bill, if it becomes law, will only be valid and constitutional because it is required. In other words, if we are limiting the fundamental right to freedom of expression, let's say you wear a mask, yes, and somebody says you're interfering with my right to freedom of expression, the answer to that is that this law is a reasonably required law to protect the public, right? To protect public order, public health, yes?
Right.
And so if there is no danger from any infectious disease like the coronavirus circulating Grenada in 6 months' time, and there is no danger that one may be imported, yes? Because once you open the borders and you have 3 million people infected in the USA, you have a risk of persons coming into Grenada, which is why there's lots of protocols in place at the airport right now, yes? Mm-hmm. But you will have that risk very present and in front of all of our minds. And so let's assume, therefore, for the sake of your analogy or example, that the world has gotten rid of coronavirus, and so there's no risk of anyone coming in here in 6 months' time, then this law will not be a law reasonably required. I would expect that the parliamentarians would convene Parliament and they will repeal this bill immediately. If they don't, then they stand a very good chance of being challenged in the court of law to say thereafter the bill does not have the backing of the law because it's not reasonably required anymore. You have no coronavirus in the world, everybody is cured, and therefore these measures of social distancing are all measures which have no basis in common sense, in practical realities. There are no grounds to put such a law in place. These laws are only valid, will only be valid because of necessity, because of the need to protect the persons and mitigate the spread of the coronavirus. If you look at the front page of the bill, you will actually see the purpose of the entire bill, which is the purpose of the regulations. It is to, let me see if I have the portion here. It is an act to regulate the containment of the spread of the coronavirus disease in the state of Grenada in the interest of public safety, public order, and public health, and for the maintenance of a substantial portion of the community and supplies and services essential to the life of the community. If coronavirus disappears from the world, there will be no need for this recital here will have absolutely no meaning. Okay. This law only works, and this is a practical reality. You could not expect your government to implement measures for the cholera under the Infectious Disease Act right now. The government has power to, the public health authorities can implement measures to safeguard people from cholera. They could go and close schools in those moments if infectious disease of that nature which is captured there are spread around the country. But if they were to take these measures and there is no such infectious disease, everyone in the country is aware there is no chance of it coming in from anywhere, no chance of it happening at all, but measures are being taken. No sensible government would want to chance that, Mr. Bowler. Yeah. And so, to answer your question briefly, I would expect Parliament to convene, repeal this law, or else face possibly a very good, successful challenge that the law is no longer reasonably required. Good. Yes?
Good.
All right. So I just want for the benefit of the general public, when this or if this bill comes into effect, because we're looking at the entire bill, but I believe that most people have an issue with sections off. You hear people saying, "Oh, say no to the bill," as was similar during the referendum. But the bill itself in its entirety is not the problem. For some people, it is just sections of the bill, and I mean, you would have you made mention of a lot of the different section, in particular section 25 subsection 4 part 1 and 2. You made mention of when that will apply and why that will become applicable. But I just want us to make mention, because there is an idea out there that we are going into a permanent state of emergency, and that this bill is what will govern the permanent state of emergency. But you had mentioned before that once this bill comes into effect, then there would possibly be no need for a state of emergency.
Yes, Ms. Duncan. If you recall, I have said that we are only able to exercise these powers under the Emergency Powers Act because there are no provisions which gives us a comprehensive management structure for the coronavirus. We are unable to tell people to go wear a mask under any other legislation. And we had to declare, there had to be a declaration of a state of emergency. The Governor General had to take that step on the directions of Cabinet. That's how that power is exercised. To declare a state of emergency, to give Cabinet the power to regulate and put these measures in place. Now, what is the intent of this bill is that if these substantive provisions, which are allowed by our Constitution, these limitations on fundamental rights, such as restrictions imposed on gatherings, requirements to wear masks, are imposed in a substantive act, implemented by a substantive act, then we can get to the point of saying that unless we need like curfews, in my view, there should be no need for a state of emergency. So one take on this is that we need to get to Parliament to really provide for substantive laws which may assist us in getting past what is really an effective state of emergency. You have heard of statements being made of a permanent state of emergency. I think what is really being said there is that we are in a new state of normal. Things are not as before, and it may be considerable time may pass before we can return to the place we were once before. And this is what I expect when people think that we may be in for a little long run. But when you look at what is in the bill itself and you see that what we are doing are the questions I've asked earlier. Do we want to have the ability to have people get tested when they come into our country? Do we want to be able to do contact tracing? Do we want to have physical distancing protocols to be continue to be maintained, at least for now? Do we want to regulate social gatherings, at least for now? Do we want to manage crowds, at least for now? We want to be able to do these things, I believe. And do we want to have law enforcement have the ability, working in tandem with the public health authorities, to have powers to enforce these measures so we can protect the public? Do we want to do that? For now, I believe the answer is yes. And so there is nothing permanent going to be put in place that is there forevermore. There are no curfews. If you look at that bill has no mention of any curfew. The provisions dealing with taking control of certain property, as you spoke about earlier, those provisions will only be triggered in a state of emergency, which that bill seeks to avoid. Yes, but the mechanism is there because the possibility, I don't want to say the possibility, but if you're managing a structure such as this, an environment such as the coronavirus environment, you have to cater for all possibilities that we may get back to a bad place. God, hope not, yes? But if we do, what do we then do? Wonder again, well, we're going to pass we have to get a clean management structure where the public understands how this mechanism is going to work. The success of our successful management requires the cooperation of the general public, requires that people understand. There will be those who will quarrel. There will be those who will make political statements, I suspect. But at the core of all of this, there will be people, the general public will have a clear understanding that what is being sought to be implemented here, what is already in place in the form of the regulations, are measures which are sensible measures, which are designed to assist, protect and mitigate the spread, protect against the spread, mitigate the spread, protect people and cater that we might have somebody come into Grenada with a case. These are possibilities that our lawmakers are agonizing over, and we have to manage this process.
All right, I have one last question because I know you have to leave, but I have one last thing that I want us to quickly touch on. There is a section of the regulation that speaks to the acquisition of property other than land under this bill. Can you give us some examples of what is meant by property in this context?
Well, I may have touched on this earlier. I've done about 3 of these sessions to this morning. I may have touched on this very issue, but let me say it this way. The provision you're looking at is the provision that currently exists in the Emergency Powers Act. Yes? If you look at our Emergency Powers Act, once there's a state of emergency, Cabinet has that power that they can exercise, and they can seek to assume control of certain types of property. And the example I gave earlier, supposing our borders were closed and we had no supplies coming into the country, and so what has happened to our medical supplies? That they begin to dry up. There becomes a shortage of the medical supplies. Suppose the public hospital runs out of supplies. Yes? And so in such an instance, and this is the contemplation of this type of provision where these supplies which are essential to life, medical supplies, food stuff, yes, these things which are essential to life, and assuming for a moment we couldn't farm, and something has happened to our agricultural sector, people are falling sick because we're inundated with cases of the coronavirus, yes? And so we depend, what do you do? And you have, let's say, private places, like private hospitals in the country, private medical facilities that continue to have medical supplies, and the public hospital system has run short of them. This provision, which only becomes applicable if a state of emergency is declared, yes, only becomes applicable then. It will allow the administration to decide as a policy measure that we need to get medicine for people. And the only place this medicine exists in Grenada is with these private facilities. So these belong to people. And so we can assume control over this. Yes? Now, that does not take away these provisions that says persons, when you acquire their property, they must still be compensated for it. The Constitution allows that. In fact, demands that. So those fundamental rights of protecting your property value and your property rights, these things are still protected in the Constitution.
Right.
And you have to be compensated for your property.
Right.
But this derogation, this particular provision gives a good government, a proper government functioning, the ability to say, you know what, my people are suffering. We need medicine. And the only place this medicine is in this pharmacy or in this place. But they have locked their doors and they're not giving it to anybody. And so the government has the ability to go and assume control of those premises for the purposes of being able to distribute and use it for the public good, to protect public health, to protect public safety. Yes? Similarly, foodstuff. Assuming that there are some warehouses where foodstuff are stored for private entities, supermarkets and so on, and they've closed their doors in an emergency, and only certain people are getting access to their goods, and the population is at the brink of starvation. I'm giving you really worst-case scenarios. Yes, please forgive me, because these are not, those particular provisions can only be utilized in an emergency and only be utilized when there is no other means available. Yes, and then our government will be able to say, you know what, I need to assume control over this particular entity so we can access foodstuff for the general public, so that children can have their foodstuff, elderly people can be protected. And this is all part of the protection mechanism. And that particular provision you're pointing to, as I said, currently exists in our laws that we have in Grenada, currently exists in the laws of Trinidad, currently exists in the laws of Guyana, currently exists in the laws of St. Lucia, currently exists in the laws of Antigua, this in England, in the UK, in USA, all these countries, these provisions are standard provisions in the cases of emergencies. Yes? And so it is not a provision that one can easily access and say, I'm going to utilize a provision like this. Laws are put in place for the management of ordered life, to protect, to safeguard the public, to regulate the conduct of the human affairs. And so laws can be abused. We are all aware of that. But you still have to have laws to govern and cater for situations that you are able to foresee or assume may arise in certain very bad situations. When the Emergency Powers Act was passed, I believe it was an act of 1983, it was catering for a period of time when there would have been bad moments in Grenada. Here again, we are in a situation that is not normal. We are in a state of emergency, but we would like to get to the point where Grenada can return to greater degrees of normalcy, if not full normalcy, as we've had before.
Okay. Before, Mr. Bola, do you have a question?
No, you go
Because
right
I
ahead.
want to make a comment. Now, there are a lot of individuals who are now saying, well, why aren't these things further explained in the bill itself? And I want you to comment on that. But I first want to say that I agree with the general public when it comes to further consultation. But I also want to say that when the referendum was being passed, and I'm using this as an example because it's a similar situation. When the referendum was being passed, what was put on the table, we had several consultations, and I would tell you, because I have been to each and every consultation right around Grenada as a whole, and I can tell you that when you go to these consultations, you see 50 people of an ageable people, you see 25 people, you see 15 people, you don't see this mass amount of people asking the question. So while I agree that consultation is something that should be mandatory, that the general public must have an idea as to what is being put forward before it even gets to Parliament, because Mr. Bola gave us an idea as to when it gets to Parliament, the stages that it goes through and why that is necessary. But even before it gets to Parliament, the consultation must happen. But while I agree that that is the case, and while I hear a lot of voices saying that we need the consultation, I can put forward many arguments as to where consultation is being done, but people do not attend these consultations. So is there any way, shape or form that these things can be explained further in the bill, and why or why not can they be done?
Well, it is a matter of how to put it. The political working of the executive gets to the point eventually where policies are taken in the form of bills to Parliament. And if you had to explain all what I just explained there by looking at that one paragraph about police powers, yes?
Right.
If you had to put all what I just said there in that one paragraph, you would probably have a couple of chapters in a textbook.
Right.
and this is exactly what Parliament is there for. Parliament is there to explain. This is why parliamentarians are accountable to their constituencies. You are accountable because when you stand up in Parliament and you present a bill to Parliament, each member of Parliament has to give a rational explanation as to why this amendment, this law is necessary. And this is the measure of whether or not governments are functioning properly and they're governing in a proper manner. The people will be the test of whether they understand the laws. And so if you have a government that keeps passing laws that the public never understands and never agrees with, then you will have an outcome eventually, wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. And so as far as explanations are concerned, I agree with you, but I also remind you this is exactly where we started this conversation, that these important matters or laws should not continue. I mean, there was a necessity for us to go to regulations, but such laws should not continue to be in the form of regulations when we can make them into substantive laws where they can be taken at a national level and explanations and discussions are being had where the public understands it. I am not saying that to take away that we shouldn't have consultations at all. I am not saying that at all. I agree that there should be consultations whenever rights are being affected, whenever you're dealing with the life of the society in significant matters, many matters, perhaps all matters. Yes, consultation, it can be done in several ways. Yes, you can speak to the technical people where it comes to technical matters, where it affects lives. You can call town hall meetings and you can have those. You can send some of them to the bar. You can send it to certain members in society. You expect that people will carry the discussion forward to others, and that's how others get it. You can engage social platforms like yourself, and you can have these discussions. This is all part of a consultation process.
Right.
All of the comments that were made in the 4 months, all of the criticisms in the 4 months, all of the points that were raised in the 4 months related to the regulation, that was an ongoing consultation process. I'm not saying that to say, let's not do this one. I welcome this formal process where we are going through now with the bar and other stakeholders in relation to the bill. I welcome that, yes? In my view, that these matters are serious enough to require this to be done in every instance. And I will assure you that the importance of consultation is being felt right now from all stakeholders. And I hope that the process will give us clearer understandings. It will calm the anxiety of some persons in society. We will have positive feedback from the legal community, feedback that will inure to the benefit of us all. I look forward to that engagement.
So, Mr. Ramdani, I said it was my last question, but something I just want to push the envelope a little bit and see if I can get something from you. I recognize, and most of us do, that a lot of what is being pushed to this particular bill has been driven by our youthful population.
Has been driven by who?
Our youthful population. Population. Yes? And it could be, based on my own understanding, a lack of understanding of the processes of how these things work, one. But secondly, they seem to be the energetic bunch who like the hype and a lot of things like that. In your own mind, we talk consultation and everything else. Do you believe the time is ripe now for us as the leaders of society to look for an alternative way in which we can reach these people? Because I've seen a couple of things happening in the very recent past, driven in part mostly by our youthful people. And at the end of it, it seems to me that they are misguided in a lot of ways. How can we, as a society, change that kind of approach? What it is that we are not doing correct, or what can we do more of? If you have the answers, maybe you don't, but if you can offer a word of advice to ensure that our young people who are the present and will be the future for us, because as we age, as we go into our golden years, they are the ones that will be taking over. They are the ones that almost controls now. I mean, they are not in the seat of power, but a lot of what they say we listen to, and a lot of what we do is patterned from how they would like to see it. How best do you think we can engage them to get them on the same page like we are?
Well, Mr. Bowler, I believe, I don't want to say you're incorrect, but I want to say that it is a very positive thing to see the young people be making comments on matters of national importance, which matters affect their lives. This is a positive thing. The fact that you and I may have a view, or I may have a view, that they haven't quite gotten some of the issues correct or right, is actually also positive in the sense that this is how national discussions are carried on. This is how a democratic society works. You don't wake up every morning and get every single thing right. You don't go to sleep and haven't done everything correct. You don't do that. Nothing like that works in real life. And so I am heartened. I am enthused by the energy that I have seen in the young people who have come out and spoken, and every member of society that has spoken. This is a very positive conversation. The government has been responsive and has listened, and this can only work to strengthening our democratic institutions in Grenada. So I do believe that there's lots of lessons to be learned here. I am glad to be part of the process where important lessons are being taught and learned. And so I commend the young people for sharing their views. I know we continue to have youth parliament in Grenada, and there are lots of forums where young people are able to express themselves, and you see that there are young people in the Senate, young people even in the House of Representatives. We have young persons there, and I am so energized by the fact that we can have so many positive things coming out of a very bad COVID environment. You know, they say a crisis is a very bad thing to waste. And so we have had bad things happen in this crisis, but we have also had many positive strides being taken. Look, we are moving closer and closer to having lots of aspects of governance being done electronically. Look, we are able to have a Zoom meeting, a telephone meeting. I earlier had Zoom sessions. Our government is functioning quite a lot on online meetings. We are meeting with international partners. People are able to look to new avenues of how to engage in commercial activities. We know the normal has changed, Mr. Bolo. The normal has changed, and our young people, if they are as enthusiastic as they have demonstrated themselves continuously to be, you will see them coming out with various strategies for business ideas out of this process. And so if you've asked me to what word of advice I have for them, my word of advice is continue to be as enthusiastic as you are, for those of you who are showing that. And those of you who are not being so enthusiastic, please get enthusiastic. Get involved in activities. Get involved in the governance of your country. And how do you get involved is in the way you've been doing. Let us hear your comments. Express yourself. Talk to your leaders. Talk to the people who are making these decisions for your lives. Let us hear these thoughts. Yes? We are listening.
Very well.
So, Mr. Bowler, thank you very much for the question, because it allowed people, us to have this discussion and make these comments.
Thank you, Mr. Ramdani. I really appreciate. We are happy that you were able to at least shed some light. Very grateful for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bowler, and thank you very much, Ms. Duncan, for having me on. I think this has been a very useful thing, and I'm grateful for you allowing me to be on to share these thoughts of mine on this rather important issue as the COVID-19 environment and bill that is being discussed. Thank you.
You are welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
We hope it would not have to be a situation like that to be able to get you on again.
Great. So have a good day. I'll continue to remain safe. Yeah?
Thank you much. You as well.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, Mr. Bola, that was an extensive discussion on the bill, what the justification behind what it is, and so on. Right, Mr. Bola, there are a few things that I want to touch because I still don't want to delve into the contents of the bill. But what I really want to touch on is the reaction. And I want to say this, and I can't even say I hope nobody takes offense because everybody thinks differently. So I can't, but I mean the best in saying this. I am happy, glad actually, to see so many young people stand up and have a voice and speak out on issues. I had an extensive conversation yesterday with one of my colleagues, a young lady that is of age with me, and we spoke about so many different issues and so many different points, you know. So it means that the young people are out there, they're listening. Let me tell you what I have a problem with. So yesterday I monitored social media and for very obvious reasons I did not engage in conversation regarding this bill because there are a lot of things being said, a lot of misconceptions being thrown out there, a lot of misunderstandings, and I'm not saying anybody's wrong for misunderstanding. If you don't understand, you just don't understand, right? And I do agree that a much better job should have been done, right? Should have been done in communicating this bill. However, given the way Parliament has functioned for so many years, I also understand why it was done in the way it was done, where a bill is put to Parliament and goes through its first reading, and then we understand what the justifications behind each bill is, and each representative gets an opportunity to now go back to their people, speak to their people, consult with their people on their issues and what they feel that is wrong in the bill and so on. So that is how it is normally done. What is happening now is that instead of it being so the draft that was leaked to the public, the draft,
well, please don't use the word
well, that was put out to the public, right? The draft that was put out to the public, the conversation that is happening now is usually the conversation that would happen after the first reading. So I understand the schematics behind what has happened. What needs to happen, though, in my opinion, is that some changes must now occur. Now that we understand and we have identified what the problem is, where we now don't want to wait until we go to Parliament to listen to the first reading to have a discussion on a bill that affects us in such a way, that we now want to know what that is beforehand so we can discuss even before it gets to Parliament. Where we now understand that and we see that happening, now that these changes are enacted, I want to know if we will only make these noises when we are told to make these noises. And I say that because for years memorial this has been happening. This is the system in which it is done. It goes to Parliament, it goes through its first reading, and then the conversation on the bill begins. Right? Now we are saying, all right, let us have the conversation before it even gets to Parliament. Are we going to do this for every bill, or is it because somebody told us that we need to have an issue with this bill? You know, and I say that not because there isn't an actual issue, but because I looked at the social media posts and I'm seeing people saying, say no to the bill. Some people don't even know what they're saying no to. Is it the whole bill that is the issue, or is it aspects of? And I know that there are very educated young people out there who are saying, well, we understand what is in the bill, but there are a lot of people who do not, you know. So are we now going to have a situation where we have proper discourse, and it's not just us jumping up and say no, because it happened in the referendum, which is why we are in the position we are in right now, where somebody told you to say no. And you decided that you're going to say no. You didn't take the time to read what was being put forward. You didn't take the time to understand. You didn't take the time to seek legal counsel on what the bill. And there were consultations, Mr. Bull, and that's why I said it before. I went to every consultation around the island.
You went to most. I don't believe you went to.
No, I went to every. I want to believe I went to everyone around the island. And when you go to these consultations, Mr. Bola, 10 people, 20 people, 15 people.
Well, I've been to and I've seen.
You know, and I'm happy that the youth are waking up and that we want to enact change, that we want to make a difference.
Yeah.
But we have to be consistent in wanting to make a difference, in wanting to make a change, and not just in the hype of the moment when we feel like, you know, it's something is hot or a topic is hot. And this is not every young person that is doing this. You know, there are people out there with general concerns, genuine concerns, who have been speaking for years on issues, who have been bringing these things to the fore for years. There are those people. But sometimes the only time their voices get heard is when there is a hype. And when there is something that everybody can jump up and make noise about. And that is my problem, the approach. You know, there are a lot of laws that I agree needs to be abolished, Mr. Bola. And I would say it publicly. There are a lot of laws that really don't make, I don't want to say sense, but don't apply to the modern world and need to be changed. But in order for that to be done, there must be a referendum.
In some instances.
And we must now understand, okay, well, you know, I looked at it and people are talking about this bill for the referendum. Everybody seems to have had issues with parts of the bill. But when you look at the results and you look at things like where Carriacou and Petit Martinique was supposed to be placed on the ballot and they said no to that, and that bill that was not passed. When you look at issues such as the 4 terms in office for any administration, any prime minister,
it was 3
terms in office. When you look at all of these things and you see that these things were struck down, then you wonder. You have to wonder as a young person, where were we then when these things were happening?
No, I think I am gathering from what you're saying, but sometimes we have to take the conversation back to where and what brings about or starts the conversation of opposing and saying, what is the motive behind those who started it? Mm-hmm. And I dare say, with a certain level of caution though, that many times these discussions begin and starts off with some people pushing a motive that is totally different to the outcome that we now get. So for example, like the bill now, the outcome we're getting is that the legal department who had responsibility for drafting and so is recognizing, yes, that while there was some consultation, there need to be more extensive consultation, that more people need to be involved in the consultative process. Mm-hmm. But I dare say also that I believe those who started this upheaval, that was not the intent they had. That is not, their intent was not for us to have greater consultation, for the consultative process to have been expanded that far. I want to, and I believe within me, in every fiber that I have in my body, that it was more politically motivated than there was an interest for greater explanation and dialogue. So sometimes when the conversation begins, is it an academic conversation where we are actually seeking to know more, or asking for greater clarity, or saying to our administrators, hey, we are here, and you cannot just go ahead without first informing us or getting our viewpoint? Most times, they say yes or say no, or so it is because there are some of us doing it for political expediency. But they said behind every dark cloud there's a silver lining, and if our young people are getting involved, like our Attorney General said, it's a good thing for us. It means that people are listening, they are looking, and they are demanding. And that is what we should do out of our government, because we've said it on this program many times before, that listen, first, when you're here, it doesn't matter where you hear it, whether it's on Hard Talk or anywhere else, try and verify. We plead to people. We attempt here on Hard Talk to try to be very realistic and to be factual and to bring you credible information. But with the best of our attempts, even when you're here, verify before you spread. So that's one. But secondly, we need to know who is leading us and why they want to lead us. Why they want to become the leaders. Why? Is it for the same objective that we have, or is there a different objective in place? Yes? So when you're getting involved, be careful what you get involved with or who you get involved with. Thirdly, our administration, our government, the executive of the government must now be much more cognizant of the fact that they cannot just take people for granted. Yes, COVID-19 has been around. Yes, there has been the regulations and the emergency powers has been enacted. But do not take for granted, because that has been happening. People fully understand and just accept wholesale. So let us know that we must have this discourse, the dialogue, even if it means, going on to the talk shows and explaining the intent of what wants to be done prior to it getting to Parliament, which is at the time when it becomes a public document, when it gets its first reading. But we understand that we are a very inquiring people. We want to know more. We want to take a peep long before. It probably necessitates now that we change the methodology of how information now is at everybody's fingertip. Long gone the days when you had to wait until there was a radio broadcast to know what's happening in country. In country, more or less, what is happening in region or internationally. Now, things that are happening internationally is at our fingertips at the moment it happens. So the speed at which information moves around, the speed at which things get to people is 1,000 times greater than 30 or 40 years ago.
Right.
So we cannot continue to operate in the 1940 fashions in a modern situation. Things move quicker. Information spreads fast. There are so many platforms on which the information moves around that we have to be equipped and ready. We have to be prepared to always be proactive.
Yeah.
Say things beforehand. Let people become informed so we can avoid a lot of the quarrel. We can stop the troublemakers in the track. And when I say troublemakers, I'm not speaking in a generalized sense. There are always a few people. For example, in all the matches we saw in the US about Black Lives Matter, the information coming out was able to pinpoint that within those who were holding the placards and demonstrating, there were some people that was there purposely to create problems, to damage buildings, to set fire to public places and so. But they came in under the cloak and cover of those who peacefully wanted to register the disgust
Yeah.
with the injustices that was happening. So too in all of these debates, we have a few people who are clouded in the sheep clothing, but are really wolves. And so I'm just saying we need to understand that.
And you see it, Mr. Bola, and I'll make mention of where you see it, because I am for the communication. More communication needs to be had. We've said this even before this issue came out. We sat here and we said that better communication needs to happen among government and its people. We've admitted to that. Government has also admitted to that. Better communication needs to happen. But you can see it. You know it's evident. It reeks when there is politics in an issue, because when I see memes going around of NNP this and NNP, this is not a NNP or an NDC issue, you know, and it takes away from the voices of the young people that are actually concerned. You know, and that is my issue. So sometimes we have to be careful to not let people drive the narrative that we are trying to get a hold of. Because guess what? At the end of the day, what tends to happen is that they feel like they have won, you know, in whatever fight it is. Because they're making you seem like, okay, look, the NNP administration trying to shove this down your throat. But today, they're not telling you that these are laws that already exist and these laws need to be changed, or that these laws need to be modernized. That's not the message that they're sending, when that is the actual problem. They're sending the message that the administration needs to change. But guess what? If the administration changes, the laws are still there. It is the same laws that will still be enacted regardless. And that is my problem. We are fighting the wrong battle. We're fighting against NNP and NDC when the issue that we are having right now is more than just politics. It deals with our constitution. It deals with the validity of the laws. It deals with our human rights. You understand? And these are the things that we need to address. So if we are out there jumping up talking about Dr. Mitchell and NNP and NDC and all of this nonsense, we're losing already. Because at the end of the day, regardless of who comes into power, these laws remain. So if the issue is the law, let us tackle that issue. Who do we need to speak to? Which civil society needs to stand up or lobby the government for the change of these laws? These are the conversations that we need to start having, and stop jumping up in politics. And I see all kind of memes. And it was very disgraceful, Mr. Bola, that as a people, we are out there on social media making the rest of the world feel like we every time there's an issue, we behave in this ignorant manner. You know, some people.
Well, I have recognized that the processes of discussion and civil conversation apparently has gone out the door. I recognize that once there's an issue now, what we have is a particular group of people calling for demonstration.
Absolutely.
And disorderly behavior.
And revolution.
And revolution and going to the street. I mean, why can't we dialogue? Why can't we call out to the people who represent us? Why can't we form a delegation and say, let us go forward on behalf of this group, this community, this section, and find out or ask a question. Everything we must drive it to the extreme. Public disorder.
Yeah.
Why are we going down that route?
Because, Mr. Bola, at the end of the day, I saw the cries for the picketing and the rioting and the revolution and the protest, and I saw them. And you know what I said? At the end of the day, when we go and we protest and we riot and we do all of these things, how many of us in that protest and that riot actually reached out to lawyers to petition the bill? How many of us actually reached out to our representatives and said, listen, this cannot stand, or we do not agree, or how can we make a change? Protesting is not the only way. And for them to make, and I've seen it, Mr. Bola, I see it every day, and it bleeds me that there are some out there who want us as young people to believe that the only way for there to be change, or for the only way for change to be enacted, is that there must be some revolution and some riot and the overthrow of a government. But guess what? You overthrow the government, but the law still remains. And another government comes and takes their place, and the law still remains. So it doesn't fix the problem. And as young people, we have to stop living in the shadows of the revolution. I mean, it brought a lot of good, and those good things must be identified. They must be applauded. But we must also, for change, if we really want to see change, then let us be different in our actions and different in our motives. And that is why I said that there are people out there who are saying no to the bill just because there are people with loud voices telling them to say no and not understanding. For example, if we remove one clause, what do we put in its place that will facilitate its function without infringing on our rights? These are the kind of conversations that we need to start having, and stop jumping up on social media speaking about riots and revolutions and things that we do not even understand the consequences of. And that is how I feel and how I felt, and that is one of the main reasons why on social media yesterday I did not involve myself in conversation regarding this issue, because what I saw was a lot of political melee happening on social media and no real conversation on how we can actually enact a change, how we can actually lobby government to change some of the laws that we believe no longer apply to us in this modern world, how we can actually make resolutions on issues that affect us on a day-to-day basis. This is a conversation that I did not see happening.
Well, my friends, we have heard it from different sections. We are totally out of time. We have gone past time by a couple of ticks, a couple of seconds. And so I want to say to you, it was a pleasure having you today as our listeners. We really do hope that we'll be able, hopefully tomorrow, please God, to engage you much more with your calls. For those who were trying to reach us, we did have our Attorney General, Mr. Darshan Ramdani. He was on for quite a while, and so he did not give us much of an opportunity to engage you. But please, the matter is still very much alive, and you must stay alive so that we can continue the conversation on another program, hopefully tomorrow. Please stay safe, and we'd like to have you on with us again for another program.
Absolutely, guys. And in whatever you say and whatever you do, be safe, be secure. I always want to be talking with you and never about you. Please do enjoy the remainder of your day.
Tropical storm Gonzalo expected to affect the island over the weekend. Details to this story and more in the National Report. Welcome back. With the details to the news for Friday, July 24th, 2020, I'm Delroy Louison. Grenada and its dependencies are under tropical storm warning. Officials continue to monitor Tropical Storm Gonzalo, which is expected to affect the island over the weekend. The tropical weather system will be accompanied by a significant amount of rainfall. Minister with responsibility for disaster management, Senator Winston Garwe, warned that preparedness for Tropical Storm Gonzalo and any other weather condition must be taken seriously.
The area can expect storm-like conditions within the next 24 to 36 hours. We have to ensure that we do what is required of us. And given that we're within a COVID experience, we know it takes a longer time to get services done. So we're asking our people to do the necessaries at this point in time to ensure that we are ready to move should the need arise that you have to relocate from wherever you're at. Every weather system must be taken seriously because of the potential of damage, loss of lives that they all possess.
NADMA's acting coordinator, Superintendent Sylvan McIntyre, said the Emergency Operations Center will be activated on Saturday at 6 a.m. He explained that Tropical Storm Gonzalo will determine whether or not the shelters will be activated.
We have had our shelters across countries informed, and we are standing by in the event condition deteriorates. We are ready for activation. So as it stands now, the weather condition will dictate as to whether or not our shelters are open. So the Emergency Operating Center up at Fort Frederick will be activated at 0600 hours tomorrow.
Rainfall over the weekend, according to meteorologist Hubert White, will be evenly distributed throughout the island.
What we expect most from that tropical storm is a lot of rainfall. It's expected to produce total rainfall accumulation between 2 and 5 inches in some areas. However, interest in the southern windwards, Grenada, Tobago, we may get rainfall up to 8 inches. And of course, that rainfall will start in the wee hours of the morning and going on to Saturday, then gradually subsiding. So as I repeat, Grenada is now, and its dependencies, is now under a tropical storm warning, which means we expect tropical storm conditions within a 24-hour period.
As the island prepares for the possible impact of Tropical Storm Gonzalo, the National Disaster Management Agency has outlined the protocols that are expected to guide the use of the emergency shelters once activated. Carlene Peters tells us more.
There will be an identified isolation area in each shelter. A health check will be conducted on all occupants entering the shelter. All occupants are required to wear face covering. Occupants are required to supply their own face covering. All occupants are to maintain 6 feet distancing in and around the shelter. Frequent hand washing or hand sanitizing and cough etiquette will be in effect. Occupants are not allowed to share dishes, drinking glasses, cups, eating utensils, towels, bedding, or other personal items. Occupants are asked to walk with their own utensils or supplies. Persons will be monitored for illnesses such as fever, chills, cough, loose stool, and frequent bowel movement. Shortness of breath or difficulty breathing and other symptoms compatible with COVID-19, for example, muscle aches, headaches, sore throat, runny nose, loss of taste or smell.
Thank you, Carlene. The Eastern Caribbean Currency Union will capitalize on the strength of the Eastern Caribbean dollar to deliver more stability and financial growth and low inflation. Words of ECCU's new chairman, Prime Minister of St. Kitts Nevis, Dr. Timothy Harris. He was addressing the virtual audience at the chairmanship handover ceremony on Friday. Dr. Harris says moving forward, emphasis will be placed on monetary and financial stability, as well as growth and management of foreign reserves to ensure the EC dollar remains strong.
The strength of our Eastern Caribbean dollar has long been hailed as the most cherished feature of the ECCU. Our exchange rate continues to serve as our anchor for macroeconomic stability and confidence in our region. With the reduced inflows of foreign currency to support our reserve, the Monetary Council and the ECCB will continue to be meticulous in the management of our foreign reserves to ensure that the ECC dollar remains strong. The EC dollar remains strong and continues to serve our people and economies by delivering low inflation, convertibility, and consumer and investor confidence.
Outgoing Chairman Dr. the Right Honorable Keith Mitchell said several member countries have realized tremendous growth and development prior to the global pandemic. He outlined some of the successes under his implementation for the transformation agenda over the past 2 years.
The ECCU recorded a pre-COVID-19 debt to GDP ratio of 65.1%, more than 18 percentage points below the levels recorded in 2012, a major achievement. Most member countries were trending downwards, and 2 member states, St. Kitts and Nevis and Grenada, actually achieved the Monetary Council target of debt to GDP ratio of 60%, a highly commendable feat. Grenada reduced its debt to GDP ratio from a high of 108% in 2012 to 58.9% at the end of 2019. The widespread impact of COVID-19 pandemic will cause the fiscal and debt performance of member countries to deteriorate, and I've seen it here in my own country. However, we should resume our push for fiscal and debt resilience as soon as it is practical to do so.
The Grenadian leader encouraged his colleagues to complete developmental tasks that were not finished, so as to continue along the positive path to resilience.
I am therefore confident that these actions will bear fruit as we confront this pandemic and seek to build a stronger and more resilient currency union. I therefore urge us all to complete our unfinished business in the shortest possible time.
This is the National Report. The news will continue after the break.
The house was shaking. Then suddenly saw we hear bang, crack, and the roof had gone.
Man, I was so scared, I nearly wet myself.
Only those who have lived it can truly understand the devastating fury of a hurricane's wind.
The house across the road just get up and roll over.
Hurricane force wind. It's a hazard. Hazards. Take control. Reduce your loss. You can hurricane-proof your home. For example, make your roof more wind-resistant by using screws instead of nails in its construction. Find out more about hurricane force winds and other hazards at your local disaster office.
A message from the National Disaster Management Agency and SEDERA.
Welcome back. Acting Chief Land Use Officer Trevor Thompson says farmers must adhere to preventative practices and measures to ensure they can continue earning a living after a storm. His comments come as Grenada prepares for Tropical Storm Gonzalo. Thompson says clearing drains near farms and removing debris from water courses is critical to preserving produce.
Remove all irrigation lines that are not buried, including drip lines and sprinklers, and store in a safe place where water or wind cannot carry or blow it away. 2. Remove your suction hose from the river and store in a safe place. 3. Secure your pump units away from the riverbanks and place in a secure location where it cannot be flooded or carried away, even from inside the pump house. 4. Remove all fuels, oils, chemicals, and other supplies stored in the pump house and secure them in a most safe location.
Thompson warned that farmers should not leave their safe spot during the storm.
During the passage of the storm or hurricane, farmers should never attempt to go and rescue or secure their equipment. Please protect your family, your animals, your equipment before and above all else, ensure that you live to continue farming after the storm or hurricane has passed.
The Ministry of Infrastructure Development and representatives from the Ministries of Health, Labour, Tourism and others conducted the second inspection of the St. George's Market following recommendations made from the first inspection of the facility. Friday's inspection was held to monitor the progress of work following recommendations made to determine an official opening date for the facility. Mrs. Marina Jessamy, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Infrastructure Development, told the GIS the team conducted a thorough inspection of the facility and found that there are still critical areas which need to be addressed.
The evaluation of Building 1 is now at 30%, and it is very encouraging to see how it was and where we are today. The cleaning of Building 2 is at 90%, so we almost finished. They are finalizing the grouting of the tiles, and I believe that in 2 weeks' time, they give us 2 weeks to finalize the sanitization, and we are doing everything that we can, working from Sunday to Sunday to meet the requirements.
Labour Officer J. Francis is pleased that the Ministry of Infrastructure has addressed some of the key areas that were flagged in the initial inspection.
Through the Ministry of Labour, we do have the ASH policy, where due to the fact that some of the boats, they do restaurant services and they do have cooking. So what we normally would advise persons to buy is the ABC type fire extinguisher, basically because A is for this is the logo here. A is for trash, B is for liquids, and then the C in case of electrical. So it will cover all areas of fires throughout if anything happens in the market. Yes, we are.
She highlights some of the recommendations made that were addressed.
When we did the visual, we realized that some of the tiles were broken. They have to do some with the washrooms facility, break off what they have and do a remodeling. We also advise that because due to the COVID and the 6 fish measurement, that they should have a part marked off here so that person could only sit on both ends. So this is like for 6 persons, but we recommend that it's 2 persons per side and that leave a marking so they won't be so close to each other.
The market will remain closed for a further 2 weeks and the sanitization process will continue. That story concludes the national report for Friday, 24th July 2020. But before we leave, we recap the headline. Tropical storm Gonzalo expected to affect the island over the weekend. That's all from us here at the newsroom. On behalf of the entire news team, management and staff of the Government Information Service, I'm Delroy Louison. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Stay up to date with all that's happening with the new national party, NNP. Send us a message via text or WhatsApp on 405-8683 with your name, email, and constituency. Stay in the know with NNP. Get updated.